Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, where we explore the future and what this means for your leadership. We ask the big questions. What's happening on the horizon? What does this mean for us? And most importantly, what skills do I need now for leadership of the future? It's time to explore. Let's go.
Hey, it's Zoe, and welcome back to the show. Plenty of exciting things happening this year. My question for you today is, how do you tackle injustices? And as I'm recording this, we are before the Christmas break, before the summer break here in Australia, and there's lots of injustices. The voice of Parliament didn't get up. We still have two wars going on, Israel and Gaza, and the one in Ukraine, and a whole bunch of other nasty stuff going on around the world. Plenty of good stuff too, though, and we do need to balance that out. There is still plenty of good things happening around the world, and it's easy to lose track of that sometimes. On Planet Zoe, there is some good stuff happening too. The sequel, Olympus Bound, is off to the editor. He is now working on the copy side of things, so it is funneling down into production mode and still don't have quite a release date yet. It's somewhere between March and May. It depends on the toing and froing of the editors as we get the whole thing spit and polished, ready for consumption. I've ordered the book cover, though, and that should be, well, by the time you listen to this, should be out and available to look at on our website. Just go to zoerouth.com and click on books, and you should be able to find a preview and pre-orders, possibly, if I'm that organized, of Olympus Bound, which is very cool. So let's talk about my guest. She is an amazing woman. Her name is Nisha Anand. She is an Indian American activist, mom of two teenagers, and leader for racial justice. She is a radical, a grassroots activist who was arrested in Burma for passing out pro-democracy leaflets. And we talk a little bit about that in this interview. So, huge experience, really caring deeply about the world and what's happening to humans around the world. Very inspiring. She is the CEO of DreamOrg, and her mission is to get a diverse group of people around the table to tackle injustices. So she's a big proponent of collaboration and deep connection to other humans and being inclusive and encouraging. She has a journey from punk rock protester to common ground champion, and it's in her TED Talk, The Radical Act of Choosing Common Ground, which I absolutely love. So without further ado, let's hear from Nisha. Well, all the way from beautiful Berkeley, California, welcome to the show, Nisha Anand.
Thank you. I'm glad to be talking to you today.
Oh, I know. You have such an understated manner for someone who's had such an extraordinary life. So let's go back to Burma. There's an origin story in Burma. What happened there? What made you become a change maker, and what is that?
Sure. Well, in 1998, the short version is I was arrested for a pro-democracy protest and sentenced to 5 years of hard labor in a Burmese prison. So that's the short version. What got me there and what ended up happening, because that itself sounds terrifying, is I was a young activist. I would protest, any cause. I got involved in criminal justice reform at a young age, fighting against over-criminalization and the drug war and police brutality. I was involved in animal rights. There really wasn't a cause that I didn't feel like I cared about. Anywhere where there was an injustice, if somebody was left out or left behind, I would jump in. I was a first generation kid raised in the South, and I always felt a little bit of a misfit. I was neither here nor there. I wasn't the old world in India or the new world in America. And so I often served as that translator and that bridge builder between two worlds. And I think it just gave me a deep passion for caring about folks that are holding that role, who don't fit in, or perhaps fit in everywhere. Could be the other way to look at it. And so, I was kind of an activist for any cause. And there was a group on my college campus, the Free Burma Coalition, that was very active in thinking about how to transform the military dictatorship of Burma. And one summer they said, let's go to Thailand and we'll learn all about the Burmese freedom fighters and the movement for democracy. And I found myself with a group of 18 other activists from around the world. We had folks from Australia, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, US, and we went into to Myanmar. There was a woman who organized this protest, and we handed out just these small, they were the size of business card leaflets. They said, "We are your friends from around the world. We support your hopes for human rights and democracy." That's all it said. We support your hopes for human rights and democracy. But in a military dictatorship that it was very isolationist, had no contact with the outside world, no one was reading papers. And in 1988, we didn't really have much internet anyway. That was highly illegal. We had to smuggle them in our shoes, and we took out the lining of suitcases to smuggle in these cards. But we handed them out for 5 minutes. We had a flight that we could get to the airport and fly back to Thailand. Hopefully we'd land there and everyone would be safe. Every single one of us was arrested before we made it to the airport. I think one group made it to the airport and were arrested inside the airport, but my group was arrested while we were handing out leaflets. And I spent a week in jail before we had a sham trial. And we were sentenced to 5 years of hard labor. And the next day we were deported. So I did not serve 5 years. I only spent 1 week inside. But it changed my path in how I viewed activism. And I look back on it now and I see that. I think before I was always an outsider. I felt like anyone with power was an enemy. They were all evil. I had to fight against, anything that had control and power. But the person from the United States diplomatic official that flew over to Thailand to help secure our release was a congressman. He was a representative from the state of New Jersey, Representative Chris Smith. This was in 1998, and he's still serving in our Congress. And he's a Republican. And for me, I thought there was not a single Republican I could possibly agree with. But he flew over, and I knew I'd be sharing a flight home with him. I'd be like 20 hours on a plane with this representative, and he was the power. And so my young activist brain thought, I am going to convince him, and I'm going to talk to him about all the things I care about, and I'm going to change his mind around all these issues. I was also a debate team nerd growing up, so I was ready for this. But instead, when I sat next to Representative Smith, we talked about all these things we had in common. And he told me about other places, human rights abuses that he cared about. And we had a lot of common ground. And I think in that moment, I transformed my relationship to power. I needed those powerful people to help get me out of prison. Had they not been waiting there, and these are people from every country that was involved, had they not been there, it could have been a very different story. And I also realized that folks in power are elected officials. We have common ground. Even if we don't agree on everything, certainly there's some things that we can agree on. And so I think that really did change my path as an activist and how I wanted to make change for the rest of my life. It's 25 years later.
Let's unpack a whole bunch of stuff that you just downloaded, which was incredible. So I love that we got to the awakening around power and what it means to be an activist now. We're going to dive into that also. Coming back to, you spent a week in jail in a foreign country. You were born in the U.S., is that right?
Yes, I was born in the U.S.
Okay. Born in the U.S. to Indian parents who migrated from India to the U.S.?
Correct.
Okay. And then this young, passionate woman became an activist and went, I'm going to go to this cause. I'm going to fly over to Burma, which it's pretty adventurous on its own. You spent a week in jail. That sounds terrifying to me. What was it like for you?
I feel the same way you do when I look back on it now, and I think that was terrifying because anything could have happened. Luckily, we were treated really nicely. We weren't treated like most political prisoners in Myanmar who are kept inside a prison called insane prison. Like literally, that's the name of the prison. And it used to be a place where guard dogs were kept during colonialism. So it's a pretty horrific place. That's not where we were kept. I actually was at the foot of a desk in someone's office inside the military police station. And I slept in front of this guy's desk. And in the morning, he'd come into work and pretend he didn't see us and step over us. So we were treated well. But the scary part of it was after the fact kind of learning. Or I remember the first time I worried was when I realized that my family was going to be contacted. It was the first night we were there. And I realized that Deborah, the woman who had organized it, would call my parents, say, sorry to tell you, your daughter's in jail in a foreign country. And just thinking about what my parents' reaction was going to be, that was probably the thing that was hardest for me. I have my oldest son's in college right now, so he's around the same age I was. I could not imagine what it would be like to be a parent going through that. I would be terrified. But I also know that the military dictatorship rules with fear. They stay in power because they terrorize their citizens. And so I also knew, and this is kind of like the hubris that only young folks can really muster, is that fearlessness. And I'm not going to show them any fear. I'm not going to show them they have this control over me. And I don't know that I'd be able to do the same thing now.
Oh, yeah, I hear you. Because as a wiser human, things could go really pear-shaped pretty quickly. And then you were sentenced to 5 years hard labor.
Yes.
And did you know that that was going to be waived and that you would get out of there? Or what was that like, being told 5 years of hard labor? Did it kind of sink in that things were not so good?
It did. It hit me really hard. But I remember I didn't cry. I didn't show fear on my face, but I do remember this highly, adrenal state. And as we were walking out of the courtroom and being escorted out, one of the guards leaned over and said, "Don't worry, you're going to get out tomorrow." In, Myanmar, there's a huge, the people who are yearning for democracy outnumber the military junta. The problem is the military has the guns. And so often we would get messages of encouragement, but very covert, and folks would hide it. And so it really wasn't long that I was sitting with the, oh my goodness, I'm spending the next 5 years of my life here. That was probably 20 minutes to an hour I sat with that. And then that night, they put all of us, all 18 of us who were arrested, we hadn't seen each other before then. We had been kept separately in the groups that we were arrested in. We went together to like a guest house, and the U.S. embassy officials showed up and bought us all beer. They bought us a case of Sam Adams beer. And so the last night in the military dictatorship, I was drinking beer provided by the U.S. government. And so it's a really interesting moment in my life, for sure.
Wow. And then the realization on the way home that who you perceived as very different to you, a Republican congressman, and finding common ground. I want to talk about common ground. And before we get there, I'm really curious about this changed relationship to power. So before the changed part, what do you mean your relationship to power? What was it like before this incident with the congressman?
I grew up a young anarchist, to tell you the truth. I had this feeling that the folks in government were, and I look back on it now, this is 30 years ago, and I think about that young idealist, the person who wanted to think of a government that really worked for the people. And I felt like it was just out of touch. I could see people starving, homeless, mental health crisis, and I thought all of these things are fixable problems, and the government is careless and isn't caring for us. And also just the small injustices that you could feel growing up in the United States, dealing with racism and sexism and things like this. And my understanding is there's an enemy. Someone made it this way. There are few in power and they control it, and we have to change that. It's not wrong. I do think that people that have the most power do have a lot of ability to change things for folks. But now I know that there's so many ways. Everything has to work together for change to happen. You need folks on the street raising awareness and chanting and protesting and educating. You need those big mass mobilizations. That's how you get the will to make changes. That's how so many countries found their independence post-colonialism. That's how we looked at the civil rights movement in this country. You need that mass mobilization to raise awareness. But there are allies everywhere, in every sector of the economy, in every business, and yes, in politics, in the legislatures, there are people who are allied with every cause. And those folks with power make a huge difference. In this country, and I like to think about political power, financial power, technological power, of course, with Silicon Valley right here, and also cultural power. And I remember the big change in the United States in my lifetime was around gay marriage. And growing up, it was not anything anyone thought was possible. And just in a matter of a few years, I mean, during the Obama administration, he said he wasn't for gay marriage. And during that time period, the whole country was for it. And I remember reading a lot of studies. How did this change happen? Yeah, there was mass mobilization, but also there was one article I read that most people said, well, now I know somebody who is gay, and that's why I feel differently. And when they narrowed in on what that actually was, there was a large amount of people that said they watched this TV show, Glee, that was out at the time, that had a large number of characters who were queer. And this changed their mind about what they thought about gay marriage.
Are you kidding me? Really?
Like, that's an unbelievable amount of power. Yeah. Culture has that type of influence. The products we use have that influence. And yes, of course, government has that influence. And so I thought if a TV show can change people's hearts and minds, which is something we know, where like if you have one-on-one contact, you can change people's hearts and minds. But that promise of technology and what technology could do to bring people together, that really inspired me as well. Like, I used to have to knock on every door to get someone to sign a petition and vote for who I wanted them to vote for. It was door knocking. That's what we did. We'd all organize in groups and go around and organize the neighborhood. Now you can skip all of that steps with social media and email and other digital organizing tools. You don't have to door knock. You can influence. I mean, Twitter in its day, what it gave you was access to journalists and reporters to tell them what was going on in your neighborhood. I am so excited about what the future could be, that connectivity, the way it could bring us closer together. Now, we also know it's driving us farther apart at the same time. So how do you harness the good and the bad? That's exciting. I think there's a lot out there that could propel us forward. So my relationship to power has changed a bit. Now I'd like to use technology. I would like to think about Hollywood and cultural power and the music and movies and stories we tell. And yeah, I want to think about how we could use Wall Street and finances and what would financial, just the burden of capitalism to also provide good. I'd love to see where that goes. So, I'm interested in redistribution of power versus just fighting power.
Oh, that's beautiful. There's a couple of things that you mentioned where you've changed your mind, this idealistic, change-driven, idealistic woman, change maker, fighting power, if you like. You change your mind about a Republican congressman. You change your mind about what it might mean for a parent waiting on the other side of the world, wondering about news of their child in jail, potentially. The question I want to ask is, how do you know you're right? So even though you've changed your mind on a couple of big issues like relationship to power and how we go about making change, what helps you feel that you're right about your perspective? As a young person going into Burma, the fight against military dictatorship feels like a just cause. How do you figure out what is a just cause?
Right. That is such a great question. I think one of the biggest problems right now is people wanting to be right. That desire to be right and have the righteous path and be the all-knowing, that is so strong right now. It's driving this polarization. It is driving us really far apart from each other because folks won't bend. And I try really hard to never say I'm right anymore. If you want to think about one of the changes I've made, it's to say, this is what I believe right now with all the information I have. What that also acknowledges is that I have blind spots just by the nature of who I am and the values I hold. There are things I won't consider when I'm starting to make a policy solution. We do a lot of policy work. If I sit where I live in California and I try to write an environmental policy that I think is good for the world, it'll be based on what I know. In California, it'll probably address drought and wildfires and electric vehicles, and that will be great because it's what I know. But if I don't talk to farmers in the middle of America who are on the front lines of climate change, I will forget. I won't even see what their needs are. And so one of the things about putting forward solutions and thinking about the future is knowing you will never have all the information. And being able to embrace that and say, I'm right for what I know my values, I know who I am. So I'll approach a problem from my value set. But I have to be open to the fact that there's so many other inputs out there that will transform how I think about it and hopefully make the solution better and more durable and more inclusive And that's what I strive to do. And what I do at dream.org is build the biggest table possible so you can get all the inputs. Relying on just yourself to be right is a losing solution.
Thank you so much. I love that perspective. I like the idea too of the biggest table possible. So can we talk a little bit about that? How do you make the biggest table possible when it comes to solution making?
Well, here in the States, the thing that we do at dream.org is it's easy when we're talking about legislation. We make sure that we only have two parties here, right? Republican and Democrat. So we make sure all of our legislation is bipartisan. We're getting inputs from people who feel differently, even though we come at it from our certain lens as progressives and the change that we want to see. But I think the other way to draw the biggest table possible, we talk about unlikely allies. So identifying a problem you're trying to solve, like I just walked through with climate change, and thinking about who are the other folks that might care about this who aren't in my community. Like I said, farmers in Middle America, military, for instance, the military has been concerned about climate change because of the scarcity of resources. And I know a lot of military bases around the world are experiencing rising waters and they might go underground. That's a very strange ally for me to have when I'm talking about combating climate change. So how can we pull together unlikely allies and see where there is common ground and what we can do to work together? We won't solve all of it together, but the parts we can do, we should do. And it doesn't just have to be policy, right? In your community, when you think about, I don't want this large development to go up right here in this neighborhood, it'll impact whatever it'll impact. Well, can you work with the developers? What are their interests? Is there a way around it? And that's how we've seen communities make change forever. We know how to do it. But for some reason right now, that desire to be right and that purity politics, that like you have to be so pure if I'm going to work with you, everyone's getting left behind. Nothing is getting done.
Yeah, absolutely. You either fit my criteria for what's right or you're on the outer. I like this idea of unlikely allies and seeking to find the common ground. That seems to be a tenet of your approach to solution finding. I'm curious if you still have this notion of enemies. If you have unlikely allies, do you still have people and perspectives that feel like enemies?
No, I don't. I believe in trying to find a world where there is dignity and freedom and justice for everybody. That's the future I'm fighting for. And so I don't want to create any solution or make any change that's going to marginalize a new group of people. I know what it's like to be left out and left behind. And just because you're not in my community doesn't mean I don't want that same beautiful future for you. I feel like at its core, all of us want to live a safe, free life with happiness and joy and make sure our families are safe and can grow and thrive. These are common things we all want. And so if I'm fighting for a future that works for me and my community, I want to make sure it works for you too. And that's something I hold true. And a lot of folks will ask me, well, do you mean like you would work with, and they think of the worst person in the world, Nazis or KKK or something like this will be the example people throw at me. And I don't think that it's everybody's work to work with those folks. If somebody's threatening your life and it is a dangerous physical situation to be in, no, I'm not going to invite you to my table necessarily. But I do know for every racist that has existed that I've met in my life, there's also people who were former racist, former KKK members, former people who had white supremacist notions. Those people exist too. And that inspires me so much because that's what it takes, one contact. I had views when I was young I'm not proud of, or things that I've said that I'm like, wow, we really talked like that. I've been able to change. I believe that people are capable of change. I don't mean it's everyone's work, like go hug a Nazi. I'm definitely not saying that, but I am saying there are people who do that work.
Really?
And that's how change and transformation happens. And I'm just an optimist. I do believe that we can get better. I do believe there is second chances. I believe in redemption. I've just seen too much of it to believe otherwise.
Fantastic. That's so inspiring. So tell me a little bit about what is DreamOrg and how did you become involved in it?
Yeah. So Dream.org is a national nonprofit organization, a social justice nonprofit. We work on two really big problem sets, climate and criminal justice reform. And we took these two problem sets because we thought they're huge. And can we bring our formula, this idea of bringing people together to solve problems and make change in these two areas? And folks thought it was impossible. And when I started 10 years ago at Dream.org, there was this one idea: we're going to pass bipartisan criminal justice reform legislation. And I thought that was an oxymoron because as a young activist, like I said, on the streets, protesting, I had never met a Republican who wanted any kind of criminal justice reform. There was very much, growing up in the 80s, it was war on drugs, lock them up, 3 strikes, you're out. We had a rise in mass incarceration in the United States throughout the 80s and 90s. I think it's like 5 times what it was before. And so I didn't think there was a way to work together, but we found a way. Fiscal conservatives didn't want to pay tax dollars to go to prisons. We had Christian conservatives who believe in redemption and second chances and are anti the death penalty. That's always been a common ground area between right and left, even though we still have the death penalty in the US. And there's also the libertarian conservatives who didn't want this large police state where folks who had been smoking marijuana were getting locked up. So there were parts of the Republican coalition that also want criminal justice reform. And so we started gathering them together. It wasn't for the same reasons I did, right? I come from this view that I had seen that the system is very racist and has unfair outcomes for people of color in this country, and disproportionate amounts of folks locked up and who stay in the system are Black and brown folks in the US. But they came at it from a different angle, and we worked together under the Obama administration to try to create a big piece of federal legislation to change the system. And it didn't pass. And then when Trump became president, there was are we still going to work on this piece of legislation? And what I knew is that the people sitting inside prison who want to come home did not care who was in office. If we could get that bill passed, let's pass it. And so we worked with Republicans. And at the end of the day, the president has to sign the bill. And it's been 5 years since we've passed the First Step Act. Overwhelming bipartisan support. Trump signed it, and now 30,000 people are home from prison because of this one bill that we were able to pass. And we were only able to pass it because of that willingness to work across the aisle and to do what it takes to make a small piece of change. And from that, you can make more. So start where you have common ground, start where there's just some desire to work together, and then more can come from that.
Thank you for sharing that story. It's a really interesting example of the power of collective will and collaboration to enact change. And I think so often we get stopped by the view of the leader. And in this case, or in this situation, the view of Trump. So I'm curious about that. When it comes to individual leaders, whether it's in the United States or in other places around the world, how much impact do you think individual leaders like Trump, etc., strong men, we've heard that term emerging more and more lately with the rise of strong men in different dictatorships around the world. How much impact does a leader have versus the collective power of the people?
That's a great question. I think that absolutely the leader has a huge impact on how the country behaves and what the country does and what the country thinks is acceptable. In the US, we have a lot of examples of that. During the JFK era, we had a lot of folks who joined the Peace Corps and wanted to work internationally to help solve all of the world's problems. We had during the Reagan era, who was very much individualistic, we had a lot of folks thinking about turning to Wall Street and thinking about how do I make money and how do I buy property and how do I increase my individual wealth. I think the influence of people in power is huge. And during the Trump era in the United States, we had this division. We had a lot of name calling, a lot of bullying. We saw a lot of folks just feel like they had to hate somebody or something. It permeated our culture. I think that there is a cultural impact. But what's more dangerous, I think, is with the rise of authoritarianism and strongmen around the world, is there's this kind of belief that maybe there's like this little dance with maybe authoritarian ways of ruling is okay. There might be something good in the strongman way. Look at, and people will give you an example of, look at the economy in China, or look at, there's all sorts of things folks will point to and tell you there might be a reason for authority, whether it's the strongman or you have folks saying here, well, no one else is dealing with that group of people, whoever that group, the enemy of the day is. It's so dangerous. And I went and risked my life in Myanmar fighting for democracy because I knew how horrific the military dictatorship was in Myanmar. And to hear some of the same things said in the United States, a country where I never thought we could go down that path. And during the Trump administration, after he lost the election, Michael Flynn, he was a general in the US government, highly ranked official in the Trump administration. And someone asked him, because this is really actually bizarre timing, but when Trump lost the US election and was trying to stage this coup, at the exact same time, Myanmar was staging a coup and overturned the results of their democratic election in 2020. This happened simultaneously, and Myanmar was successful. And someone asked Michael Flynn, hey, why can't something like what happened in Myanmar happen here? And he said, I don't see why not. Maybe it should happen here, or it should happen here. And so I was listening to a US official say that what was happening in Myanmar is something that should happen in the US. It was horrific, but also very bizarre for me to sit here and think in my lifetime, I had Republicans flying to Burma to get a student activist out of jail. And now they were saying, why don't we make ourselves like Burma? Democracy is very fragile. It is very precious. And I feel like we have to protect it and be wary of that rise to authoritarianism. And there's this saying, it's like a frog. I don't know how it goes because English isn't my first language, but the frog in a pot doesn't know it's boiling until it's already boiled. Do you know this expression?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you put a frog in a pot of cold water and slowly heat it up, and it doesn't jump out because it doesn't notice the gradual temperature rising, and it boils to death.
Exactly. That's exactly what it feels like right now. The things that we thought were completely abhorrent and unacceptable before have now slowly become acceptable. It's dangerous. Yeah.
It is a very scary time to be living in the U.S., I reckon. My sister lives in the U.S. with her family, and I also have an auntie and uncle and cousins in the U.S., so I'm always close to feeling what's happening there. So does that change your focus as an activist right now?
I think that democracy has always been really important to me. I mean, as you can tell, putting my life on the line for it when I was young. What I feel like we do at Dream.org is democracy at scale. What I want to demonstrate is not just that we can do everyday acts of democracy and learn how to come together in our communities and learn how to work across different divides, whether it's, racial or partisan divides, whatever they are. We can come together and do projects together. I think we can do it at scale. And in fact, that's what democracy is supposed to be. You're supposed to have differences of opinion. You're supposed to debate. You're supposed to argue. And then you're supposed to come to the floor, come together, and come up with a solution that everybody can live with, work with, thrive under for progress. You have to have progress without threatening to completely demolish the state. That is what the American experiment was supposed to be about. That's why democracy is supposed to be the government for multiracial, multi-generational, multi-everything, multicultural society. It's supposed to have a voice for the most people, and we're losing that. And so by showing that you can do big solutions coming together, I think we are applied democracy. And so it doesn't really change. I think my career has been with playing with things at bigger and bigger scale. And so when it was just, I want to influence, a few people in my local neighborhood to change a certain policy, or I want to be an activist on the street, I think now I am in the rooms with the policymakers, writing the legislation, seeing what bills we can pass that can change things for the largest amount of people possible. And so that's kind of I don't think my mission's changed, and I don't think my values have changed. I'm still that little girl who like hates injustice wherever I see it. I think my strategy has changed throughout the years, and I just keep wanting to play this bigger and bigger game.
Thank you for sharing that. How do you think things are going to play out next year with the Trump factor? You know, he's back in the running for president.
Oh my goodness. My hope is that there is a way to stop him from running. Quite honestly, just the ugliness of the election cycle is something most Americans don't want. Poll after poll shows that the majority of the country does not want to see another Trump presidency, the majority, Republican or Democrat, and they don't want to happen to the culture what happened during that era. The problem is we elect politicians in this country at the moment that are more extreme on both sides, and that's who comes out to help determine who are the candidates in our elections are the more extreme. So right now we have a small, loud group that wants to see Trump at the forefront, but that's not where most of this country is. And as the optimist, I hope that that'll play out. We'll see.
Yeah. Wait and see and track what we can. And in the meantime, keep showing up as somebody who wants to make the biggest table possible. I love that. So, Nisha, are you ready for the Fast Five?
Yes, let's do it.
What's the future tech that you most want right now?
I would love for us to be able to fly without polluting, without polluting the environment. Is there a way we can travel, like all of the travel to get here to there? I have never seen Australia. I would love to go without destroying the earth.
Yeah. Okay. A few guests have said teleportation along that lines, as long as it doesn't produce any carbon. Number 2, best tip you ever got for leadership?
Hope it's your fault. And it usually is.
What does that mean?
The little explanation that goes with that is that something happened at your organization, like whatever problem is out there, hope it was your fault because you can fix it. Even if 99% of it was someone else's fault, that 1% of it that was your fault, you can fix that. And that's a gift. And so whenever a problem arises, the first thing I go to, why it was the best piece of advice, is what did I do wrong? What can I do better? What piece of it can I own and apologize for and help make better? So hope it's your fault. That way you can fix it.
Awesome. That's terrific. Number 3, what's one problem at work you'd love to wave a magic wand and be fixed right now?
Too many meetings. If I had to wave a magic wand right now, how do we make meetings more impactful and less of them? For sure. It's eating up way too much time.
Okay. Yep. Sound advice. Number 4, thumbs up or thumbs down. Who's a leader that deserves a thumbs up? And who's a leader that deserves a thumbs down?
I was thinking about how much I admire women who lift up other women in terms of their leadership ability. And there's this woman, Amy Jo Martin. She runs a community called Renegade Global. And not only is she getting like women leaders together just to help grow their careers, but she also started teaching us all about investing and finance and kind of building this large collective of women that can grow their wealth, grow their power, become the powerful people in the room. And women leaders who lift up other women leaders. That's my thumbs up right now. Thumbs down, I don't think I can give a thumbs down at the moment.
There's a few out there who deserve a thumbs down.
It's not my style.
Okay, yes. Got it. No worries.
It's just not my style to...
No problem. Number 5, what is your favorite leadership book or podcast?
A book that really transformed me and allowed me to embrace love in my leadership style was See No Stranger by Valerie Kaur. It's not a traditional leadership book, but it is about how do you make nobody the enemy, which is a very hard task given how I grew up and what the world is like right now. And so See No Stranger is this book that really gave me that ability to find love in how I lead and inspire others to find that love in how we do the work. And so for us in everything we do, I say it's not for us if it drives people further apart, if it increases division, if it throws out any hate, that's not for us. And I hadn't seen leadership like that before. And so being able to embrace that is part of my leadership style.
Oh, love it. Thank you. That's an amazing recommendation. I appreciate it. The Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast is proudly sponsored by the Amplifiers Academy. It is an online self-paced leadership development program that you can join at any time and progress at your pace. There are very short video lessons, great checklists and resources and recommendations and book summaries, all there to help boost your leadership thinking and abilities. We focus on leading strategy, leading culture, leading change, and leading performance. So if you want a go-to resource that can help boost your strategic abilities immediately, check us out, Amplifiers Academy, on the zoerouth.com website. See you there. Nisha, this has been amazing. Where can people find out more about you and the work that you're doing at dream.org?
It's that easy, dream.org. It's like, it's one of those easiest ways to find me. So our website is dream.org, and we do a lot of work in criminal justice reform and climate. But I really think that we're the community for anyone who wants progress without polarization. That idea that, we don't need, like I said, that purity politics, that we can find a way for a future that works for everybody, and we can find that way together. So dream.org.
Thank you. And I love that as a tag. Progress without polarization. That's the kind of message we need.
I'll use it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nisha. This has been tremendous.
Thank you.
Well, that's a great start to the year. And I love Nisha's perspective on leadership, on collective wisdom and collective power and collaborative power. I found that interview entirely inspiring. My takeaways are: create a bigger table. I love that. Try and get as many perspectives around the table as possible so that any policy and any decision that you're considering will be considered from as many different eyes as possible. And the second takeaway is lead with love, and the idea of see no stranger, and really leaning into finding something lovable about other humans with whom you disagree. That is an exercise in compassion, and I think we all need to work harder at that. So the tip of the week, it's an insight from my latest novel, Terra Blanca, Insurrection. And it's a little bit of a conversation between the two main characters, Regan, who's got his own views on leadership, as in a command and control style, who's got very regimented in his ways, and Riley, the governor. And this is they're having a conversation just towards the end of the book. And Regan's discussing his point of view versus Riley's point of view. And he says, "You have to let everyone have their say," Regan explained. "You consider everyone's point of view, even when the answer is obvious. It's annoying. Tell her, Vincent, what is Riley Addison like as a governor?" Now, Vincent, by the way, is a doppelbot. He is an AI robot. And he says, and he's got a penchant for saying blunt truths. And he says, "Riley Addison is a pedantic priss," the doppelbot offered. "Nice. Thanks for that, Vincent. I'm just following process, Regan. Those are the principles of collective decision-making. Sometimes a process is a pain in the ass." She laughed. Agreed. I like that as an excerpt in relationship to this conversation, because it takes a lot of effort to sit down at a huge table of different perspectives and sort through whose perspective is right, or what are the elements of everyone's perspective that can be collectively built on. It's hard work and it takes time, and it'd be so much easier if you just pick one solution and went with it. And yet, as the book Terra Blanca Insurrection shows, that doesn't always work out so well. So coming up next on the show, we have the amazing fellow Canadian, Laurie Duguay, and we have a raucous and fun conversation about all things people. She's a people geek like me, and it was just a delight to talk to her about the challenges and successes we can have in bringing people together. What I would love for you to do is to rate and review the show. We are going into our 7th year. Oh my goodness, how did we get so far into the show? I'd love to find out what you love about the show, what other leaders or interviews you'd like to hear, what you want more of, what you want less of. what you love in general. If you could share episodes that are meaningful to you with other people, that helps spread the word and get insights from these amazing guests like Nisha into more ears, which would be terrific. And if you don't want to do anything publicly, feel free to email me, zoe@zoerouth.com. I love hearing from listeners. It makes this way more of a conversation. And I love hearing how the episodes have helped you in your leadership journey along the way. In the meantime, live well, lead well.
You've been listening to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast. To find out more about leadership of the future or to contact Zoe, go to zoerouth.com.